Okay.
89.
Is that good?
Oh,
I don't
man.
know.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, it's possible that we're live right now. I'm not sure. So I'm Brian Kavanaugh. I am the IT director for the Radiation Virtual Visiting Professor Network. I'm currently on probation for multiple previous incompetencies. If I don't screw this one up, I might get relief from being on probation, but I'm not so sure. I can only assume that if you're in the audience, you're interested in the question we're going to address tonight, which is to say, what did we learn from the 2021 Radiation Oncology Match? We have a distinguished and diverse group of stakeholders on our panel who can offer some input into that question, we hope. So starting from roughly west to east, we have the author of An Inconvenient Truth, Dr. Simul Parikh. You know him as a family man, an avid skier, a social media pundit, and a community radiation oncologist, and I believe that would be the correct order, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Simul? That's the order, right? Yeah, of course.
That's right.
Okay.
Thanks for the introduction.
We're also fortunate to have Dr. Chelsea Pinnock join us. She is the program director at MD Anderson Cancer Center. And oh, by the way, if you have nothing better to do and are looking to learn something on Friday, she will be speaking at a Rover Series lecture on lymphoma. I know our residents are excited about that, so we're all looking forward to learn some good stuff from you, Dr. Pinnock. We have also from Texas, an erstwhile Chicagoan, that would be Dr. Shalene Goodman, who is a former Arrow chair and also author of a recent Red Journal piece entitled No Longer a Match. She will bedazzle us with some data that we will use as a platform to begin our conversation. Further, I guess, east slightly, we have Dr. Rahul Tendulkar, who is the program director at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation. And Rahul, I haven't asked you this, but are you any relation to Sachin Tendulkar, the greatest cricket batsman of all time? I was curious. I never knew that. Is he a cousin or something like that?
Very, very, very distantly. I've never met him.
Okay, well, I mean, I just want you to send him a get well message because unfortunately, he's got COVID. Did you see that?
Oh.
Yeah, no. All right, I digress. Back to the main topic. So Dr. Trevor Royce is also in the Eastern time zone. He is now at UNC, and he's a radiation oncologist, but he has recently made an interesting career shift. We would love to hear more about that sometimes, Trevor, but you are now, I know, working mostly for Flatiron's Health. And so we're all looking forward to the work you'll do in that regard. I know you're very interested in the issues of large-scale public health decision-making, and we're excited that you'll be there as radiation oncologist and look forward to what we can learn about that. And last but not least, on the panel, we have someone who needs no introduction, Dr. Lewis Potters. He's the chair of SCARAP. He's also the chair at Northwell, and he's an expert sailor and quite a fast runner. I've never been able to keep within shouting distance of him at the annual Radonc Astro 5K races because I'm pathetic. We were talking about that earlier. He's not someone you're going to catch easily unless you're not in really good shape. Now, the moderator for tonight is also a familiar face. She's a former Arrow chair. That would be Dr. Kaylee Doak. We're fortunate to have her on our faculty here at Colorado. And she will be leading the discussion. I will be trying to pay attention to what questions come in through live chat. I will do my best to insert them as needed, although I think you'll find we have probably a lot to talk about just among panelists here. And one other thing I'll just mention is that we agreed upon ahead of time that the ground rules will include each of us referring to the other by first names because this is a very collegial discussion. We have in our prep sessions, emails, and a couple of other conference calls gotten to know each other a little bit, I think, and all respect each other's opinions, and I think all have good things to say. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the good Dr. Doak. Kaylee, take it away.
Hello. Well, we have a lot to talk about tonight, that's for sure, and we have plenty of people to hear from. So I'm just going to kind of jump right in and start with Shalene. She has some data to discuss with us regarding the recent match. So Shalene, take it away.
We'll do our best. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen to let me know if it works. Okay. What can you see?
We see it.
Yeah.
You see it? Okay.
Yep.
So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this amazing discussion. I'm sure it'll be very informative. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our recent publication that is still in preprint that the Red Journal was nice enough to publish for us. So this is really on behalf of the Aero Executive Committee, as well as our faculty advisors, including Dr. Kavanaugh, Dr. Fuller, Dr. Pendletar, Dr. Gillespie, and some others who gave some great feedback. So this really originally began as, I'm going to go very quick, this began as just a very quick analysis, and it really turned into a 10-month-long deep dive. We kept kind of coming back to it, but there's a lot of great, interesting data in here. So the facts, that's my job. What are the facts? So as we know, the number of programs, residency oncology training programs, and the number of total positions offered have significantly increased really since the early 2000s. As of 2021, there were 188 total positions offered in the NRMP and 87 total participating residency programs, demonstrating really a twofold increase since approximately 2001 and a 1.6-fold increase in programs since approximately the same year. So when we are looking now at what has happened in the U.S. senior MD applicants, what we see is that over time we had this big peak in 2012 when there were 222 U.S. senior MD applicants for much fewer available positions, and this really kind of, there was some variability, but it kept up until about in 2019 when the number of U.S. senior MD applicants really sharply dropped, particularly in relation to the number of available positions. And you can see here in 2020, there were only 128 U.S. senior MD applicants. And in 2021, this past year, there were only 104 U.S. Senior MD applicants for a total of 188 available positions. At the same time, we see that non-U.S. senior MD applicants continue to increase over time. These asterisks denote significance. And here's the median IQR from these the U.S. senior MD applicants and the non-U.S. senior MD applicants. Moving on, when we then kind of look at all of the 19 medical specialties, including radiation oncology, and we say, is radiation oncology an outlier, or are other specialties really experiencing the same thing? And what we can see is that radiation oncology is really unique. We were the only medical specialty in 2021, this is updated for 2021, that had fewer applicants than the total number of positions available. That includes MD, DO seniors, as well as others, including IMDs. So we are not par for the course. We're not average. We are below average. When we look at applicants for radiation oncology in the 2011 through 2020 NRMP cycles, we see that up until 2020, we had a sufficient number of USMD senior applicants who were preferring radiation oncology, meaning they applied to radiation oncology because that was their specialty of choice. This really changed in starting in 2019, but we had data for 2020 demonstrating that there really were insufficient number of applicants to fulfill these July 1-2 positions. And when we look at who matched, we can see that 121 USMD seniors who preferred radiation oncology matched in 2020, but approximately 27 were ultimately filled via the SOAP. So in 2020, there were 29% of programs were unfilled in the NRMP prior to the SOAP. 33% of positions were unfilled. In 2021, 33% of programs were unfilled. In 2020, 19% of positions remained unfilled prior to the SOAP, and the same thing really happened in 2021. And when we look again and to see, is radiation oncology special or unique, or are we par for the course? We are definitely special. We had a significant increase in the absolute percentage of unfilled positions prior to the SOAP relative to all of the other specialties. We came in with a nice 20% this year. When we look at the number of filled positions, so positions that were filled by USMD DO senior graduates in 2020, only 67% of filled positions were filled by USMD DO senior graduates, which is fine, but it's a significant change from what we've seen the previous decade. And this year, only 111 of them, 59%, were filled. And when we look at this, at the change in 2021 versus the last decade, we see that radiation oncology is really in a place on its own. There was a significant decrease relative to the previous decade, 37%, that really is not similarly seen by the other specialties that we looked at. And lastly, we saw this year a 791% increase in the number of positions filled by IMGs relative to the last decade. Last year was about 419%. And actually, lastly, this year, this is not this year, this was last year, 2020 NRMP, 15% of positions were filled in the SOAP, and we are currently waiting for the data from this year. So that was a very quick run through the data.
Great, thanks for that, Shalane. So we are gonna run through everyone just with some kind of opening statements. And then, we've been doing kind of a lot of preparation. There's been a lot of discussion going on prior to this, today's event. So we're gonna also sink our teeth into a few more topics after this that have been kind of highlights in our discussion. So Rahul, do you wanna just kind of weigh in on some of this and why you think, what's going on here?
Sure. So, I'll try to give my perspective from the viewpoint of a program director for the last 10 years and kind of seeing things over time. And first, I just want to thank all of my fellow panelists and Brian and Kaylee for organizing this. I think we all care very deeply about our field, and I'm honored to be part of this conversation. So, how did we get to this point? I think, we as radiation oncologists have prided ourselves on being data-driven and evidence-based. And unfortunately, regarding the rad-onc job market, we seem to lack a shared objective truth in many ways. And for some people, it's difficult to acknowledge whether a problem with the job market even exists. But I think the match data that Shalane just showed us should be eye-opening for anyone who has been unfamiliar with recent trends. We live in a very polarized world. You can look at our politics or issues like climate change and the anti-vaccination movement, and people have very strong opinions about things. And while we all live our own individual anecdotal experiences, it can be surprising or even disorienting to hear that other people who sometimes are just like us can have a totally different lived experience or worldview. So while many of us in academic programs have, personally seen graduates in recent years finding great jobs, I think people can still be oblivious to the fact that a lot of people struggle in the job market. And, if that's not, right in front of you, we don't even know that it's happening. And some might question, is the job market really that different now than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And these questions, I think, are really hard to answer without some of the objective data that we would all love to have. My own personal experience graduating in 2008 during the financial crisis was filled with a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. And certainly this year's class graduating in the midst of a global pandemic is unprecedented too. Is one of those markets worse than the other? It's impossible to say. And certainly predicting the future is never easy either. So, I think with a lot of the changes going on in our field, which I think Trevor will touch on, I think it's safe to say that we'll have a lot of anxiety, kind of going forward. So I kind of think, a lot of this has occurred because we've lived in our own information bubbles, and having panel discussions like today is really important because it forces us to hear alternative viewpoints and raise our own awareness to other people's, concerns and priorities. And so hopefully we can continue these conversations at individual programs and really listen to each other and get some better ideas and move this forward. So sometimes really it takes a crisis, or at least a perceived crisis, to make structural changes to the status quo. And the optimist in me thinks that we'll get to that balance soon. It's just a matter of when and how.
Thanks, Matt. So, Simone, you've kind of represented the community group of physicians, and maybe kind of give us your perspective on things here.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking for the community, I didn't leave Astro. Astro left me. There's a trust issue between Big Rad-Onc and Little Rad-Onc. Big Rad-Onc is the academic chairman, the Astro leadership, the ABR, the editors of our journals, the people charging 5 to 7 times the rates that the community and freestanding centers charge. Some of you on this panel are Big Rad-Onc. We didn't like it when you ignored Chirag Shah's warnings in 2013, and we really didn't like your responses to him, because unlike him, you weren't data-driven or thoughtful. You were selfish. We had chairmen saying, we need more residents to drive faculty salaries down. Now, what Chirag said, it may have come to fruition. We didn't like it when you ignored Ben Smith's analysis in 2016 that modeled the oversupply. This was based on new information about hypofractionation, stereotactic treatments, emission of radiation, and surveillance. Why didn't we have this discussion back then? Why wasn't this discussed at Astro's annual meeting, or should I call it the Varian and Proton Industry Trade Show? We didn't like it that you doubled the number of residents without input from stakeholders. We didn't like it when you failed 40% of the residents in 2018 and then shouted Ang Hoff out of one side of your mouth, and the residents are poor quality out of the other side of your mouth. Mudit, Anna, Trevor, me, we wrote a paper showing that this was patently false. We're still waiting for an apology from you too, and you know who I'm talking about. This same board grandfathered in people that have no business contouring simple IMRT plans, yet are allowed to practice outdated medicine. We're upset that you bring politics into every aspect of our being instead of focusing on advocacy for cancer physicians and cancer patients. Why are we getting involved in congressional bickering and angering our members that just want an advocacy group that advocates for cancer care? We want a break from the culture wars. We don't want chairmen that write editorials clumsily and incorrectly writing about cancel culture. Just in case you aren't clear, cancel culture doesn't mean people are being mean to me on the internet. Please stop. What are we, in elementary school? We don't like when you say women and minorities as one word. Women have been historically excluded for one set of reasons. Minorities have been historically excluded for another. We don't like it when you say we have to lower standards to include them. You made the standards. They're terrible standards. They need to be changed to make us all better. We didn't like it when you tell breastfeeding mothers that they should come back next year for their exam instead of accommodating them. We don't like when you tell us it's unsafe for someone to work from home. Supervised patient care, expertly aligning CBCTs, contouring intricate head and neck plans, feeding the baby, and then finishing a telemedicine consult. But it's safe to have some semi-retired person who doesn't know what a CTD is babysit the clinic and charge full freight. Little Radonk, we want truth. We want accountability. Little Radonk wants you to start choosing wisely. Oh, who is Little Radonk? It's Radonks like me that treat patients. You know, the 80% of us out there in the community taking care of people. What do we want? We want Big Radonk to stop pissing on our leg and telling us it's raining. We want you to clean up this mess. Tell us you're sorry and tell us how you're going to make things right. Thank you.
Not mincing words today, so we're gonna dive deeper into a lot of that discussion. I love it. So next we're gonna hear from Trevor. Trevor, kind of tell us your position on some things here.
Sure. Thanks, obviously, to the organizers for having us, and particularly would want to give a shout out to my co-author, Shirag. As many of you all know, we put together this piece in the Red Journal that led to the invitation here tonight. I think I want to take the moment to make a couple observations that are often overlooked and are part of what we wrote, but they deserve to be kind of outright acknowledged. The first, regarding kind of this issue broadly, I think it's critical to understand the history. And if you look at our piece, Figure 1 shows this trend of positions over time and then provides some historical context of some of the forces at play that may have contributed to those trends at those periods. And for some reason, it's often overlooked that in the mid-90s, there was very clearly this brisk specialty response where residency spots were cut dramatically, as much as 30%. And at that same time, training was extended by a year, from 3 years to 4 years. And I have spent quite a bit of time, trying to read about this and talking to people that lived through this period and were active practicing through this. And as far as I can tell, there's no true clear reason for this reaction other than to improve the labor market at the time. And I think we should acknowledge this. So what is the difference between now and then? Well, I can't really answer that because I wasn't around then, and it was now 25 years ago. And the sands of time have sort of faded some of our memories. But clearly, medicine has become more corporatized. There's probably a more conservative approach among specialty groups about what might be allowable or acceptable or legally permissible than today than what was then. And the data isn't great from that period, but it does seem like there was a true crisis at that time where people were truly unable to find jobs at the Astro annual meeting. And the field did seem to be in dire straits. My hope is that we're not there yet, but as you all might understand from what we put together, we had some concerns that we're headed in that direction. So along the same lines, I think another important acknowledgement we must make is this distinction between the present state or the current state of the specialty and the future perception. And those are not the same things. What is happening now at this moment may be one thing, and what people are worried about could happen can be completely separate. And the concern today really is largely about the future perception. This fear, this uncertainty, this doubt, about how the job market might respond to some of these headwinds that the specialty faces. I'm happy to talk specifics about those headwinds, but I think everyone here knows what we're talking about, the APM, fractionation changes, patterns of care changes, etc. It's important to acknowledge that this binary outcome of did you get a job or not may not tell the whole story. And so, we can survey all the graduating residents and they may all find employment, but really the devil is in the details. And those details are much harder to uncover. And in fact, this sort of endpoint of job or no job, I would consider a late endpoint, like overall survival, die or not die. What we really want to know is the progression-free survival. Are people truly finding the jobs they want? Are they making these serious trade-offs between location, scope of practice? Are you getting the type of job you want? Are you practicing where you want a job? And then, of course, compensation. Again, I would think compensation might be one of the last things to change before you get to that point of no job or no job. And maybe we just haven't seen that yet. Who knows? So I'm making the argument that this sheer amount of uncertainty in the specialty is reason enough to consider how many people we train. And I think that that is the reflection and the sentiment that students are feeling. When you have these debt burdens, this delayed gratification, you are interested in taking the sure path. You don't want to touch something that is risky. And I'm making the argument again that this uncertainty alone is reason to consider things and to perhaps deleverage the specialty in a sense by decreasing our positions. And I hope that's what we communicated in our piece. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Kaylee.
Thanks, Trevor, for that context. I know you've been thinking about this for a while. So, Chelsea, we wanted to talk with you next about kind of your experience as a program director at MD Anderson, and maybe touch on a little bit about what kind of led to your decision to reduce the number of spots.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, coming from my car here. Clinical, medical education for residency and fellowship training has a long history of using speculative data to inform decisions about program expansion, right? And that's not unique to our field. We've done that for a long time. And it should go both ways. If there are any concerns about, the health of the specialty or adverse workforce situations, and I think that is also something that should influence decisions about restricting slots. And so, with that in mind, in 2019, after you saw the graph that nicely showed us of that precipitous decline, after that year and then the second year when it happened again, it was obvious that it just wasn't a blip. And we started having discussions in an open and transparent way with our residents at the time, departmental leadership, our program leadership, and it was at the time under the leadership of Dr. Das, who was our program director then. And we started having these discussions about considering reducing the number of slots that we would match. And so, we're a really big center on our main campus. We have over 70 faculty members. We have increasing clinical volume annually, and we have the resources and the clinical volume to support training more residents than we're actually currently ACGME approved to do. But just because you have the resources and the ability to do something doesn't mean that you show it's in the best interest of everyone. And so, we made the decision to go from matching 7 that year to matching 6. That was made, unilaterally without discussion with other programs. I'm sure you guys know what I'm hinting at with that language. And the factors, that influence that decision, in addition to the decline in the applications that we saw, was additionally, future perception, and it is a perception or concerns about the future job market, because we hadn't experienced any challenges with that, and we haven't with our residents finding jobs, but that is a concern. And then also beyond that was just a desire to contribute to restoring the health of our specialty and being good stewards. And so those were kind of the factors that we considered, and kind of all agreed on that. And similarly this year, I felt the same way. Like nothing, it hasn't changed. If anything, things have gotten worse. And I think the point that Trevor makes is a valid one about um, the what's perceived versus real. But at the end of the day, um, you know, I would argue that the market is just properly and appropriately matching supply and demand. And so we're seeing this in regards to the medical student interest in numbers. And it's something that I think that we all have to take seriously. I think the data, there are a lot of factors that do warrant concern for their workforce in the future. And so I think with all those things taken together, that was enough for us to decrease the number of residents that we matched.
Thanks, Chelsea. Lewis, I know you have a lot to talk about tonight. Maybe you want to just kind of start by, you said you wanted to kind of set the record straight on something, so go ahead and kind of,
No. Listen, I just want to say thank you for everybody to be participating. I think, and it's already been said that, the passion and the interest and, about what it is that we do every day as radiation oncologists and the value that we provide to our patients is something that we all really believe in. And I don't think we would be here otherwise if we didn't. And I think having conversations like this is really important in terms of understanding, where we're going to be going as a specialty. I'm going to be retired, long before you guys hit my age. And it's important that the next generation of radiation oncologists, have a good sense of where we're going and how to be successful. Because, I've been in practice and clinically active, still clinically active for the last 30 years. And I wake up charged every day going into work and caring for patients. And I think we do, I know that we do provide, high value service. And being one leg of a three-legged stool for cancer management and being the smallest of those legs, treating 50 to 60% of cancer patients, puts a lot of onus on us in terms of, what we have to do to be successful in managing and hopefully curing more cancer into the future. I think, Trevor, it's already been pointed out in the context of what Trevor was saying about the perception of the future. It's, I'm coming from a little bit of a different angle in the sense that, it's interesting to think that medical students who have really no idea about radiation oncology know what the future is going to hold by walking with their feet. And if they're that smart to understand, where our job market is after, we've been in this field, then, shame on us for not being at that level of the medical students. That said, and it was pointed out earlier, this is a crisis, and it's not a little crisis. This is a big crisis, and I think it's an opportunity for the specialty to really think about what it is that we bring, the value that we bring in terms of, taking care of our patients. On one side of the formula is perhaps the job market in the future and the perception of the job market in the future. And that seems to be driving a lot of the conversation, and I think it's important that we try and understand that going forward. There are a lot of other things that contribute to that perception of the job market, other than just, training more residents on a year-to-year basis, right? We're worried about hypofractionation. We're worried about, elimination of supervision rules. And is this going to really create a problem for the specialty going forward? On the other hand, we have an aging population with projected 45% increase in the incidence of cancer in those over the age of 65, because the population is disproportionately aging, now more so than ever in history. And the opportunities for our specialty, I think, are wide open if we get away from counting fractions, and if we get into starting to think about some of the things that we offer patients that perhaps we routinely don't continue to do, whether that's brachytherapy, radiopharmacology, and other things. So I believe that there's a double-edged sword on just putting all of the eggs in the workforce, the future, or the perception of the future of workforce in radiation oncology. That workforce may turn out to be, needed. Now, having said that, that's not to say that we can't impact on the quality of training the future generation of radiation oncologists. And there's no doubt that during the expansion of the residency programs, that some of the rules around the quality of how those programs are being managed, perhaps could have been massaged, edited, changed, and I'll talk to that probably later, after this introduction, in terms of some of the things. So I'm speaking as myself now, but as president of SCARAP, we've come forward with some ideas. A crisis is an opportunity. We've just lived through the year of, hopefully, the year of our lives in terms of healthcare crisis in the United States, and I started out my piece outlining that the stress test of COVID on the healthcare system in the United States really was a failure. There's a lot of issues with healthcare in the United States in terms of access and in terms of quality, and I think that's evident in the outcomes of COVID. It's also evident, and it has been historically evident, in the way outcomes in cancer. So we'll move forward into the next session, but I think it's important to look at the UCLA data that came out, the blue paper, and aspects of and advances of radiation oncology. I think, and here, I do take some responsibility as a sort of like the elder statesman here, and a chairman and whatnot, in the sense that, we have been over the years, fortunate to have attracted the number of applicants into this specialty. And it's been said before, and I would agree that, chairmen generally take pride in, a dean's meeting, being able to say how competitive, the field has been. And we've been incredibly fortunate for the good number of years, the last 10 to 15 years, to attract the best and the brightest into radiation oncology. And in some ways, shame on us for not thinking about how we can work going upstream in terms of attracting medical students into the specialty. And when you look at the blue data and advances, the perception of medical students on radiation oncology, the number one issue is fear of physics. And that's followed second by, their concern about applicant board scores. And then third is the workforce, and then fourth is whether or not they've been doing research. And so when you look at how the medical students are thinking, that creates an opportunity for us. And I don't think it all falls on workforce, the perception, as Trevor said, of the future workforce. On the other hand, I do think there's an opportunity for us to look at, what that data might look like, and take action upon it. But I think it's a little bit premature to just, cut programs for the sake of cutting programs because of the perception of the future. I think there's opportunities for addressing quality and training in terms of how we think about how we're going to be addressing the opportunities for value, and for us to start getting away from counting fractions as a means of assessing our productivity, because our productivity expands a lot more than just counting fractions. So look forward to some of this discussion.
If I may interject a moment right here, just for a second, there is a vibrant conversation going on in the chat space, and that's terrific. And there are a lot of questions being posed. I made the mistake of asking people sending questions, and you guys are sending in some great questions. Now, we have prepared a few discussion questions that I think will touch on some of the ones you've been putting through the chat room, but I'm going to try to filter as many as I can and catch the ones that are not touched at all. So we're going to switch over now to going through what we predicted to be several of the key questions, and we'll try to go through them somewhat quickly and pick up the pace a little bit so we can get some of the audience questions in. And also, I should say, if at the end of this, we will probably send out a Twitter poll to see if we need to do some more of this, and we can do another session perhaps in a month or so if we didn't quite get to enough of the topics, because there's so much to talk about. It's a very rich topic. So I'm going to stop right there, turn it back over to Kaylee, who will, I think, spin out to the group a couple of the questions we predicted to be coming in, and we'll go from there.
So Louis kind of segued into this a little bit. So, I mean, we really want to know what is the root cause of the waning U.S. medical student interest in our field, because we obviously all love it. So there's been a lot of discussion and some theories here, but who wants to go first? Maybe, again, kind of try to limit your comments here so we can get into all these topics. But Rahul, Trevor, Chelsea, Rahul, go ahead.
Sure, I'm happy to weigh in. I think of the issues that Louis outlined. I think the only thing that's really changed, I believe, is the perception of the future job market. Right? Like physics has always been an issue, et cetera. And I think concerns about the job market trickles down to medical students through personal anecdotes and social media. And I think social media is kind of an accelerant to some of the polarization that we've seen in the world that we talked about earlier, and it allows like-minded people to find each other a little bit more easily. And I think what we've seen now is kind of analogous to the GameStop phenomenon, right? So with GameStop, individual investors saw an opportunity to organize and kind of have like an online revolution of sorts against big hedge funds who they felt had rigged the system against them. In their favor for a long time. And, I think in the case of radiation oncology, the establishment, large academic systems, benefit from the steady creep of residency expansion over time. Employers benefit from having a readily available workforce. And there's really no counterbalance against this, right? Organizing, unionizing, things like that are really hard to come by in medicine. And I think, people have used social media and really gotten to the hearts and minds of medical students, out of frustration or perceived necessity to kind of create this counterbalance. And I think a lot of people within the establishment, so to speak, have been kind of surprised by this disruption to the status quo. And I think it's sort of like a GameStop, analogy in slow motion.
Well, you had some thoughts about this when we were kind of discussing beforehand. What do you think?
Yeah, I pushed back a bit. I mean, I think it's a little bit silly to say that a forum is going to change the trajectory of an entire medical specialty. And I think it plays a role, but there's more to it than that. And I think we're not giving credit to students and residents as much as we should. Chelsea, I also want to say, I know your residents. I know most of them. It wasn't that easy getting a job, and you guys are the best residency in the whole country. And they got jobs. All of them got jobs. If you ask them with closed doors how they feel about it, it was a tough process. Much harder than it used to be. And much harder when people used to call you on the phone at your resident workroom and say, here's your job. You want it? Rather than that, you have to really work for it. In fact, the last Astro president talked about networking. We worked so hard. We worked so hard to get here. And you're telling us to network, to schmooze, to go to these meetings and kiss butt. And, so I think like you guys are at one perch, you guys are on your perch and you see it from your perspective. But I talk to the residents. I know them. They can talk freely to me. What's happening is the jobs are, you get a job this binary, you have a job. The jobs don't lead to partnership anymore. The partnership track increases. The pressure is on people to treat. I have a buddy, I'm not going to say who it is, who told me his evaluation with his private practice told him he wasn't golfing enough with referring physicians. I mean, that's absurd. It's absurd that that's a thing. What you're seeing is people in private practice are being told that, hey, there's too many see no treats. What see no treat is means you've seen a consult and that patient doesn't get treatment. That means she's 77, stage 1 receptor positive, 2-centimeter tumor, and you've said, hey, endocrine therapy is okay. And that's okay. That's a standard of care. But in certain practices, that's not okay. Or you got your Gleason 7 in 1 core, 80-year-old guy, and you say, hey, you know what? You don't need treatment. You'll be all right. We'll just watch the PSA. And you get a ding on your evaluation for that. You have these academic satellite jobs. And again, I've interviewed for a few of these. I've talked to a few of these. These are 3 to 4 hours from the major medical center. So-called academic jobs. You're getting an academic salary to do private practice work with no research infrastructure, with no resident, with no admin assistant, no admin time. And these are just like centers that are bought out, and you stick a label on it that says University of so-and-so, and your white coat says University of so-and-so. And now you're trying to put the guy across the street out of business. And that's what's happening. The jobs aren't that good. My job's good. I'm good for the next 10 years. I save aggressively. I'm going to be out of the game real soon. But I don't think it's that good for the people coming out. And I think if you really talk to your residents and you really talk to your junior partners, they have these same concerns and they have these same feelings about it. I'll let you guys go.
Thanks. Trevor. Go ahead. Trevor and then Lewis. Let's do that. And then Shalane, sorry. Okay, each of you 1 minute here.
I'll make it quick. I just wanted to quickly go back to the idea of the cause of the decline of interest in radiation oncology from a medical student perspective. And it goes along with what Rahul was talking about with this idea of echo chamber and social media, and I think that amplifies messages, no doubt. But the reality is that this message is out there, and if our desire is to increase the number of residents interested in radiation oncology that apply and go forward with that application, let's call that the numerator, and the denominator is the number of people that know about radiation oncology. Just because we reach out to more students and increase the denominator, the total number of students that know about radiation oncology, it doesn't necessarily mean that that will result in a larger numerator of people actually following through and applying to radiation oncology. And that's because the message is out there. We might just educate more medical students about these doubts about the field, and then they don't apply. So I just wanted to leave that out there, and I'll pass it on.
Shalane, let me go to you real quick, and then Lewis, you kind of recently have found a job. You were recent Arrow chair, so you kind of have heard from a lot of residents. What's your take?
Oh gosh, well, there's so much to say. But what I want to say is, I think this all harkens back to the relationship between the generations, between the people who are junior faculty or residents and our relationship with people who are perhaps a little bit more established in their careers. I think that for the past few years, I know that I've been very frustrated with kind of how our concerns are kind of taken seriously or not so seriously, right? Whether that's with our concerns regarding the ABR examinations, and if people took those, feelings or not feelings, those impressions of what happened seriously, that there was some kind of statistical anomaly that still really hasn't been explained, and that was never really taken up in a very serious way. We were actually quite, I felt insulted by how people treated us in terms of when we brought up our concerns in a very statistical, data forward way. They really weren't given, credence at all. So I think that that's something that really harmed our relationship. I think that ever since, Chirag wrote his editorial, I think that if there was a better relationship between the younger generation and the older generation, for lack of a better word, then so much of this could have been avoided, right? If really we both respected each other's opinions and had a better dialogue about it. Number two, I'll be quick, is that I just find it disingenuous regarding, we want to attract the best and the brightest. We want to advance on radiation oncology as being one of the leaders in a multidisciplinary care setting. But then when it comes to, when there's not filled positions, really, I think that it's important to attract a wide array of people, a diverse group of individuals into our specialty. But what we see in terms of potentially scoping people who have never had experience in radiation oncology, when you take very talented medical students who find themselves unmatched, and then they have 2 days to decide whether they want to take a job in a field that they've never had experience. And I find that almost exploitative and really taking advantage of a vulnerable population of individuals. And I understand that there's a workforce. Residents play an important part in care in the hospital setting, but I find that really disingenuous. And a resident, it's free labor, but you could also hire a mid-level to help with that burden of work. Okay, thank you.
That brings up a good point, Louis. Can I respond to that? And also tell me a little bit about our next topic, kind of go into why do some places soap and not just kind of let nature take its course? Give us kind of a chair's perspective on that.
So I can't speak for other chairs in terms of why other programs soap or not, but I have spoken with some of the residents about it. And one of the concerns. So if you really think about it, this is really our second year of having to deal with the issue of soaping in the specialty. And so it's still, from a program director and the chair perspective, it's still something that's new, and it's something that, as I alluded to earlier, is still a crisis, and has only gotten larger this year. And I think the attention that you're seeing from SCARUP is just one small example of, the chairs of programs, waking up and recognizing the need to address this. I can't apologize for other chairs. I try and, reach out from a generation to generation, and in the context of, the faculty that work in community practices in our health system, we set up mentor programs for the faculty to be engaged with with the residents, and so that it creates an opportunity for the faculty that are not in the mothership to spend time with the residents and to work with them and to mentor them over their 4 years. And so there are ways of managing community practices within an academic setting that is engaging with both the residents and the faculty in terms of long-term satisfaction. The concept of disingenuous was raised, and I'm in some ways too much of an optimist. My piece was that I wrote was a glass half full concept, but I'm in some ways too much of an optimist to accept the fact that those on social media are really looking to destroy it. On the other hand, I do think that anonymous posting and the use of calling out individuals is disingenuous on the part of the people who are posting on social media, and I think that the damage there is real, and we're seeing that. It's not the only reason why we're not attracting students, but it is part of the reason. And I would only say that the idea going forward of posting is, from my concern, perfectly fine. But don't do it anonymously, and don't call out individuals that you don't know and have no idea about in the context of an argument. I'm happy to talk about the perception of workforce, the need to address the number of people that we train. But the question that was raised was, what are the opportunities for getting medical students involved? And here, and I said it earlier, is an opportunity for program directors and chairs to go upstream and create the denominator that Trevor says, because the reality is that the bigger the denominator is, the more likely the numerator will be positive. And you can't guarantee that, but it's the only way you're going to create the opportunity. Because if you don't grow the denominator, the numerator is absolutely not going to grow.
But I would argue that you can't control social media. You can't control the public's response to you. You are chair of SCARUP. And with that power comes great responsibility, right? You are one of the few individuals in our field who has the power to impact what other chairs are thinking and the decisions that they will ask their program directors to make. You have that responsibility, you have that power. And so I would say, don't worry so much about what social media is saying. They are responding to what you are doing. And that's what's important.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. You don't see me, going back and forth on Twitter and social media. But, listen, I'm only doing this for a year. And quite frankly, Scarab, I think, has created a niche for itself. And I'm happy and hope that the next leadership of this organization continues to drive the field forward. We are not the only political organization in radiation oncology. Having said that, and several of you, know this, last year we managed and worked together in addressing the delivery of the boards and working with the ABR and so between ADROP and Arrow and Scarab and we I think did okay. We got somewhere in terms of changing the minds of the ABR, and that's not the end of it. We have a letter that's not prepared for tonight, but to address family leave, and that's going to ultimately go to the ABR in terms of some of their policies and things along those lines. And so listen, I take this role seriously, and I've reached out and I've learned a whole new cast of characters, whether it's Emma Fields or Oliver or Dan Golden or a whole bunch of people that I never knew before, to try and understand what is it going to take for us to be a successful specialty. So the work that Dan Golden's doing with the ROCSIG is absolutely amazing, and I think in some ways it's going to be more impactful to the specialty because, in particular, his group is doing it the right way. They're doing it in a scientific way, and so Emma and her reaching out to the chairs and discussing the issue of soap, regardless of whether all the chairs were ready to accept it or not. We'll find out what the data is, and I'm not optimistic that the data is going to be good on SOPA, but the fact that those discussions are happening needs to be appreciated by the field.
We will want to touch on another letter that Scarab sent out recently here with you later, Louis. But Brian, I think you had some comments about this. So.
Oh, well, first of all, I feel a little bit guilty that Louis is absorbing all the heat as older guy in the field. So I at least had to come on and take some of the heat. I mean, I'm an older person in the field. I've seen
various... on.
Sorry.
We can yell at you too.
Show yourself.
Show myself. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So I am, one of the older people in the field and had seen a couple of cycles come and go. And there were half a dozen really good points made in the last 10 or 15 minutes. Shalane, your point about an intergenerational tension is something that I think we should continue to think about. Maybe we don't explore that particular one too much tonight because we're a little match-centric tonight, but I think there is something to that, and I think it's an unfortunate situation because I think there are good people who've been in the field for a long time who feel that they've worked hard to establish the field and laid the groundwork for the folks who came after. And yet, on the other hand, I hear the points being made about folks who are entering the field now and say that, well, you know what, you had a few blind spots or you had some things that, where your judgment was a little bit questionable at the very least. To the specific issue of why some programs soap or don't soap, I'll just say this, two things. First of all, I think we in radiation oncology are sometimes beholden to this concept in, I think, adolescent or child psychology called the universal audience. We think that we are the center of the universe. Everyone's watching us. Of course, why not? We are so important to everyone. But as a matter of fact, you might be surprised that some people don't have that same perspective. So, for example, I will just mention that when I had a conversation with my own dean at my annual review, and I just happened to mention that, oh, by the way, we're going to cut back on a slot because of X, Y, and Z. There's a concern about job market, something like that. He's like, what? Really? I didn't know anything about it. I thought, that's curious. I don't know why. We're an academic institution. Why would you not want to do, we do education, don't we? So I had to sort of explain. He was sympathetic to the cause at the one point, but I mean, it's just not a natural thing in a lot of places to scale back because education is what you do, right? That's the momentum of things you do. And also, I would be very cautious about making any individual judgments on the local decisions. There's always local politics. Someone might have gone to very great lengths over the past 5 or 10 years to build up the prominence of radiation oncology at their local place and to convince the leaders that they need to make investments because we want to train people and this is important and blah, blah, blah. And then to reverse that momentum is a local cost and to some extent an indirect cost to the field because we're all trying to make radiation oncology a higher profile field. So there's probably a lot of complex calculus that goes on at individual places. So I don't think we would ever want to pick on any one individual place. We certainly, hats off to Emma Fields. We've mentioned her a couple of times at VCU, making a stand. Hats off to Lewis for reducing a position, and Chelsea last year doing that. We did it this year. I mean, was it a noble thing to do? I don't know. Was it because I was really paranoid that I'd be the first chair to have somebody graduating and know where to go? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe there was some of that. Maybe I'm insecure. I don't know. But there's a lot of things that go into these decisions, and certainly, I think fixing this problem, if we agree there is a problem, at the level of telling people not to soap is not the place to fix the problem. We might come to the ideas we have on how to fix the problem, but that's probably not the place to do it. Although the public advocacy did pay off, at least in some places. Cincinnati, Jordan Crawford scaled back, and I'm probably forgetting some others. So anyway, that's my only points. I'm going to shut up for a while. The discussion on the chat side is on fire, and I'm reading it. I'm thrilled by it, and I cannot keep up with it. I couldn't even read the questions fast enough if I tried.
No, we can't see it. Tell us what they're saying.
Let me just make a quick.
I'm not reading it.
Well, it'll all be saved. And
let Trevor speak.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go
Sorry.
for it, Trevor.
Sorry. I just wanted to make a very quick comment about soap while we're on the topic. I mean, there's so much to unpack here. We clearly need to do this again, first of all. But if you look at the soap numbers this year, they're actually amazingly similar to last year, and we should kind of ask why. And it's because the goalposts have changed. I mean, the applicants are just different. The body of applicants, if you look at them, however you want to measure it, you can call it quality if you want, or there are different ways to define quality. But clearly, this body of applicants has changed over time, and it's because programs are interviewing the same number of applicants, but the applicants themselves, the makeup of them, for whatever reason, the profile is different. And so, what is happening? And credit to Kara Downs at the University of Virginia for helping me articulate this idea, but it's a little bit of a soap paradox, where actually, if you want to get the highest quality applicant in the match, you can get it through the soap because you're getting people that are not going into ophtho or ortho or derm, and they're looking for an out. And this is a complicating factor of this.
Hey, I'm probably the only person. I'm probably the only person in this group that actually soaped, or what we used to call scrambled. I applied in 2009, 2010. I applied to 72 programs. I got 7 interviews, and I got 0 positions. So I walked in Monday morning, kind of hungover because I was on a Vegas boys trip the weekend before, and got that email, and it was horrible. It was a horrible feeling. And you go in there, and basically you get a list of all the available positions and all the available specialties, and your heart's racing because you just dumped $200,000 into your education, and you don't have a job. You don't have an intern year. You don't have a residency. You don't know if you'll get another one. I worked really hard, and I still didn't match. And then you're like, well, emergency medicine sounds pretty good. I'll try that. Maybe psychiatry. Well, that's not working out. How about anesthesia? Oh, there's 2 radiology spots. Let me try those. And do we really want doctors that make their specialty selection based on that? And so I sucked it up. I took an intern year at UPMC, and I did 1 just one research paper, doubled the number of interviews. That tells you about the standards that we have. They're bad. It doubled the number of interviews, and I matched. And I ended up transferring to a program because I didn't want to wait a whole year. And then I got, I started UPMC, and I got a great residency and a great career out of it. Had I chose radiology or family practice or psychiatry or whatever, it would have been okay. And I love what I do. I love radiation oncology. Like I love it so much that I tweet. My wife gets angry at me. She's out there taking care of the kids right now. I'm talking to you guys. It matters. It matters so much. So like, don't take soap or scrambles casually. These are real lives. These are real careers, real people that are deciding their fate over the course of 48 hours.
Can I just say real quick, I just think that we're focused on the wrong thing. Like soap is just a symptom of the problem. And, there are some people that will be excellent radiation oncologists still that soap into our field. Some people that are geographically restricted, they're interested in being in one specific area. They didn't match into that specific specialty, and they end up at a program in an area that they like, and they end up in a great position. That's not always the case, but I just think that the problem's not truly the soap.
Okay, no, I would agree with that. In a way, and shame on us, we've been too complacent over the last number of years in the types of residents that we're applying, and further, we've been way too homogenous in the context of, the types of applicants that we accepted, and generally speaking, on average, but, significant is, the board scores and the number of research projects. And that has in itself disenfranchised a whole number of medical students. And, it's not as if, and again, sort of shame on us, it's not as if, you're born into the field of medicine knowing that you're going to be a radiation oncologist. There's many, many MS2s and MS3s, even late in the year MS3s, that would love to do radiation oncology, who for years felt that, they got into it way too late to make themselves competitive. And so the point that in some ways was misinterpreted in my paper, and probably because they've written better, is that we have an opportunity now to reach into the medical schools and address this and create opportunities for people who want to be clinical oncologists who don't have 5 or 6 publications. The changing of the step 1 to pass-fail should be a red light for us to sort of get away from looking at step scores as a reason why we interview or don't interview candidates. And I think that, and again, I'm putting the onus on us as program directors and chairs. The onus is on us to reach out. This is not something that's going to be managed passively. It has to be something that's actively managed on our behalf in order to bring students into the field. We're all passionate about what we do, and it's our responsibility to make sure that next generation is likewise going to be passionate and interested. And this is an opportunity we have not had in 20 years to bring in a new type of candidate that I think is going to be important to the field.
We had that opportunity the last 20 years too. Like that opportunity has always been here. It will always be there.
Yeah, can I just say, and I think it's a great opportunity because I think, Liz, when I read your editorial, there were some things that I disagreed with. And so I think maybe this is a good time, if this is okay for us to just discuss this briefly, but I don't agree with the assertion that we should align opportunities for diversity with this declining interest in the field or quote unquote competitiveness. We've had, for the longest time, we've had opportunities to include women as well as underrepresented minorities in our field, and we've chosen not to do so to a point where it almost feels intentional or exclusionary. And so I think it's just a little bit dangerous for us to proclaim that now that we have this perception within the field that there's not interest and no one wants to do it, that now that opens the door for Black physicians, Hispanic physicians, and women. If you look at the data, I quote this paper a lot, that Dr. DeVille and Dr. Gibbs published on underrepresented minorities in our field. And, the numbers are abysmal, and it's not just the low numbers that are reflected in the people applying. It's worse. It indicates that we're not including the people that are already in our specialty. So, 5% of Black physicians apply, about 5% become, 3% become residents, and then only 1.5% of faculty. And so you look at many academic centers, even large academic centers, there's not one Black physician. The Hispanic situation is similar. And so these are people that are in the field that are still right now not being included. So I just would love for us to kind of separate those initiatives and not to link them.
Yeah, no, I have to reply to that real quick, but I hear you in that context, and I don't want there to be that linkage. On the other hand, the data does speak for itself, and it is an issue that we have to address, and it is one that hasn't been addressed appropriately in the last number of years. And if we don't address it actively, passively, it's not going to happen. So whether it's a timing issue, whether it's a linkage issue, which I don't want to necessarily, get into that rabbit hole on, this is, something that I think, we have to take seriously for our specialty. We have to, just like everything else, we have to look like the patients that we treat. And we generally, as a specialty, don't. And it's important for us to make that transition.
It's the timing of it just feels like using that word disingenuous, but we didn't have to lower the standards. Chelane's got a PhD, Chelsea's got a PhD, the women on stage here, they're firepower. They got Ferrari engines. I'm just a Toyota here. And I don't get that. Like, I don't get that idea. Like, we had all this opportunity. There's so many great candidates out there. And what it takes to be a great radiation oncologist, honestly, it's not the hardest field. It's not that hard. It shouldn't be the most competitive based on scores and publications. You should just love taking care of cancer patients. That's it. And yet, we created this game. And there's like systemic things that made it really hard for minorities or people with limited resources. Research years were a big deal. Who can afford to take a year off? I couldn't, to move to Houston or Manhattan for a year. All these types of things that put people at disadvantage. I mean, not everybody can extend their training. I know PhD's paid for, but that's life. People have kids, people have spouses, people have to do things. And I just, the connection, suddenly in 2019, 2020, and 2020 and 2021, we decide, oh, wow, we got to be more diverse. We should have been doing that a long time ago. We should have been just looking at people who want to take care of cancer patients.
Can I just insert something only for the sake of historical perspective? Because I came into the field at the time of the previous perceived glut, right around the time when residency was expanded from 3 to 4 years after an internship. So that's the one thing that was happening actually when I was coming in. And by coincidence, I just want to tip my hat to Ed Halperin, who was one of my mentors and faculty at Duke when I was training. He was tough on me, I want to tell you. I needed it. I needed some tough love. Believe me, he provided it. I can assure you that. On a daily basis, I was given tough love. But to his credit, he's always been a champion for the folks who are not getting the same advantages as others. And I think I shared a link to his paper from that time of the discrimination at the time, which had to do with the so-called audition interview, which to some extent has certainly persisted. There are structural unfairnesses. There is the unfairness that it is much more available to an unmarried male, white, upper middle class medical student to be able to do an audition interview, an elective interview at another facility, another institution, than it is available to women, minorities, and a lot of other groups. And so there have been these unfairnesses, structural, for quite some time, which, we need active intervention to try to work on. It's one of the features that has come up alongside all these other important ones.
Thanks, Chelsea, for bringing that up. That was our next big topic that we wanted to talk about, so that was perfect. So, I think in the interest of time, the next kind of discussion was, where do we go from here? What do we do about this? If anything, who wants to kind of jump into this first? Rahul, go ahead.
Gosh, you put me on the spot. I think, I really appreciate the discussion. I wanted to say, Simil, I really value your honesty here and sharing your story about what you experienced. I always think back at, when radiation oncology was considered competitive, how many great applicants, experienced that same sense of loss of not being able to enter a specialty because we overvalued certain things. And I hope we use this opportunity to really recalibrate what we value, kind of going forward. How do we fix where we're at right now? I really think that, from the perspective, again, as a program director, I think really focusing on a lot of educational aspects will solve a lot of collective problems in our field. And I think the barrier to expansion has been probably low for a long time. I think the barrier to entry into the field was too high, as alluded, for people who could afford to take a gap year, for example, or afford test prep, right? So there's a balance in terms of barriers to entry for the programs and for applicants. Focusing on educational priorities, I think, SCARA just today put together some priorities, which I think are really going to be a strong foundation and suggestions that I hope the ACGME takes into account very seriously, because I think, if there are programs out there that overvalue, again, resident contributions to clinical workload relative to the educational value that is provided to those residents, we have an opportunity to make those adjustments. And I think that'll solve a lot of the, kind of perceptions of angst that are rightly, out there, I think.
I'd like to hear from Louis and Shalane, and Louis, go ahead.
Yeah, so for those who don't think that the older generation, and I feel old just saying that, doesn't hear you, we do hear you, and in the context of this being a generational discussion, and it's for real, and so whether it comes from SCARP, whether it comes from other organizations, the fact of the matter is that, and I say this about how we run our department, it's about quality and offering, our patients, high level of standards and care. And if we focus on that, then, in a lot of ways, other things, get taken care of. So SCARA put out a 10-point bulletin that we sent to the ACGME in consideration of some of the changes that I think will help with the culture of learning and create a better learning experience for residents. And, I don't need to go through all of them, but I do think there needs to be, and SCARA believes there needs to be a greater emphasis of success at the primary institution in terms of being able to keep the residents together, especially, and it's my opinion, in a smaller program with 4 residents, to be spread out over 3 or 4 different buildings in different towns and counties, really doesn't create the type of learning culture that I think is best. So changing the percentage of time that one spends at the mothership, the fact that procedures need to be done more at the institution and less farming out of residents to other institutions to obtain clinical experience, are some of the points that we've raised. I tweeted it, and it's on the SCARA websites for those who want to read it in a little bit more detail. Minimum number of cases for common diseases, not rare diseases, I think is a critical opportunity for the ACGME to address. And the programs themselves should have what we would all consider sort of basic, technologies for providing motion management, SBRT, and things like that at the mothership. So, these are things that have been, that we've been banning about for a little while. I think the timing of all this is critical, and I think it creates an opportunity for discussion. I can't speak for the RRC and how much of this they will take up or not, but it does create an opportunity from the patient quality learning culture experience to start to change the conversation a little bit.
I'd really like to applaud SCARE-Op and particularly you, Dr. Pradesh, for taking this initiative. I really think it is one of the most critical things that we have needed as a field for a few years now. And just as this, you mentioned this is a great opportunity, this to welcome in perhaps, to diversify how we recruit people into our specialty. I also think it's a great opportunity to ensure that we're providing the highest quality of education to every single resident, not just those who are at the biggest programs. The other people can figure it out, right? We are investing in all of these individuals who are matching into this specialty. I really feel that we need to take all of them on as our residents instead of just, Cleveland Clinic residents, the Anderson residents, et cetera. There's so much heterogeneity in educational quality across programs. And I've seen it, and it's hurt my heart to just see why do these residents get this opportunity and these research experiences and this many months to do research or this many months to go out and do an elective rotation and have thousands of dollars per year to go to different conferences, whereas other residents, they get 1 month off. They have to cover multiple services where their experience is clearly not in prioritizing their education. And I think that is something that very, very much has to change. I think every program, every chair, every program director has the right thing in mind. They're all good people, I think, most of them. But we really have to prioritize this, just like we prioritize our patients. This is our one opportunity as residents to learn from the best, to learn from those who have the most extraordinary experience and specialization. And if we don't allow people to utilize those 4 years for that opportunity, it's really wasted. And then people go off on their own and they're independent. And it's hard. It's a hard field. So you really need to allow people to focus and prioritize on their education, not on writing notes and doing scut work. Thank you.
Ryan, what do you think about that?
Pardon me, if I could just say, Louis, it's totally okay for us to share the link to the SCARE letter now, right? It's public record. It's all
good.
Yes.
Yeah. I tweeted it a half hour before.
Oh, okay, good. So those
I have to get into this tweet experience, so I felt like
Okay, no, it's all good. You did the right thing there. That was well done, well played, good.
Listen, the other thing is this, and again, with the job market, I just want to say this. In 1990, when I was looking for a job, it was not any easier, and that's not a cop out for me to say that, and it's not meant as a way of trying to paper over the experience today. But trying to find a job geographically in a field that was half the size as it is now was not easy. And so one of the things that I took away from that, and having trained in New York, at the time, there were a good number of chairs, shall we say, that, from a mentorship and perspective, were really quite difficult. What I took away from that was, and I think Brian has the same sentiment in a lot of ways that I do, is, if I'm going to be training the next generation of radiation oncologists, my success is going to be their success. I don't need to write another paper. I don't need to get my H-index any higher than it is. And what matters to me, and, there's no H-index for, getting jobs for residents. But I think, all of us as program directors and as chairs need to take this, seriously in the context of mentoring. And so, I've learned from my past experience and the anxiety and the concern that I went through is the same way most of my residents still go through. And I think it's helpful to sit down and say to them, listen, you may not sign a contract until March or April, and that's okay. And to work with them and to try and I said it earlier in our pre-meeting. I'm a helicopter chairman, for my senior residents, and I'm all over them. And I think that type of responsibility is something that goes a long way. And I know Brian takes it seriously, and there are a number of other chairs that are friends of mine that do. I'm frankly surprised to hear from others that not all chairs do take it seriously like that. And I think that's an opportunity for us to address.
Thanks. I think this has been a good discussion, and like Brian alluded to in the beginning, we're going to do a Twitter poll and see if we should continue this discussion here. So I think a lot of good things have been brought up tonight. PK, go ahead.
Well, I can't do justice, unfortunately, to the fantastic conversation, but we are going to really share the comments among the panelists and digest a little bit more. Let me just represent one overarching question, and it's something like this, and we don't really have the answer to it tonight, but it's like, okay, so if we're going to make a change, how does that change happen? We didn't touch on the how of it. We might have touched on, well, we're not touching who actually has the authority, if anyone, to make that. And I mean, I don't know if we can say that there is one clear and unambiguous authoritative body. Maybe that's part of the problem. And SCARF is very influential. This letter, Louis, is terrific that you and the executive committee came up with. ASTRO has not historically been necessarily engaged in the business of regulating residency training programs. They have outsourced that, if you will, to the ABR and ACGME. That's not been a major focus until the past several years, when it became, I think, an issue that was brought to the attention of the leadership there. And, to be frank, a lot of these organizations are, not as agile to be able to shift and pivot as we might like them to be. However, I think this is really good dialogue, really good conversation that's been put out there, and this is not the last word on this topic. And, like I say, we look forward to more interactions. We will carefully read the feedback we've gotten already, maybe reformulate another panel with some of the same folks, maybe some new faces, and see what we think we can do that might be productive.
I could just say one thing again. Sorry, I know I talk a lot. Dr. Potters, you say, it was hard back in the day. It was hard back in the 90s. Life is hard. It's going to be hard. Don't freak out. It's just hard. And on a certain level, I agree with that. I was stressed out my entire residency, and it turned out okay for me. I'm happy in my position. But I would argue, when we've asked our SCAROP, ASTRO, ADROP, okay, we're concerned about this. Can you please help us look into it? Can we, whether that would be, getting data or hiring a consultant or getting an objective third party, or perhaps an objective third party lawyer to say, what are the limitations? What is a workforce analysis that, what really are the projections? I don't think it should be me doing it. I don't think it should be any of us, really. Like, I think we're all great and we're all really smart or whatever, but that's not our job. And we should be, hiring people potentially if this is a critical issue. And I believe we all think it is. Let's talk to people who this is their job and, get their opinion on it. Let's consult somebody else.
I don't think they want the answer. That's the problem. That's the problem that I see, because this is an easy thing for a specialty like us to do. It does cost a little bit of money, but important things do. Third party would make some sense here, because I don't trust it coming from the top. I don't trust them saying, guys, it's okay. Everyone has a job. Don't worry about it. We got this. Because we're feeling it on the ground. That's the problem. And you're not listening. People aren't listening to us. And I hope today we get a chance to make that clear, that we do not feel listened to. It's worthwhile to look into these types of things. I ran it by a friend who dabbles in intellectual property law. He's not an antitrust expert, but he dabbles in a little bit of it. And his thing was, yeah, maybe. But the thing is, who has standing to say there's an antitrust problem? The chairman? Do the chairman want to make that argument against us, against their own specialty? And so I think it's worthwhile to look into. And I don't know why we're so resistant to that, because I've heard from people that it was brought up to the leadership to consider that, and it was a flat no, we're not going to do that. And so, again, we don't feel listened to, and it's time to try to listen to us.
Everyone else?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, does everyone else have maybe some, 30 seconds to a minute kind of closing remarks here?
So Brian said, what's the one thing we're going to walk away from today? And I think the one thing that we're going to walk away from today is the fact that, we're communicating about this. And these answers are not going to come easily. And, they may require hiring a consultant, they may not. But the fact is that the more that we talk about it, the more that we're honest about, and I didn't raise the issue, but this generational divide, and building bridges across, I think is the beginning of the opportunity for us. And at the same time, we start putting patches on the quality of our training programs. We start assessing and working on the competencies like the ROCSIG group. And, we don't ignore things that need to be managed, but at the same time, we learn to communicate a little bit better so that it's appreciated that, that we're all here. I can't speak for my entire generation or for Astro. I have my feelings about, about where Astro potentially could go. I mean, the concept of, physician-led, professionally managed type of organization would be directionally something, that I think would be a positive change. But that's a bigger argument than me even. And we just continue to communicate. We talk, and we decide, what's bit by bit, what the best way going forward is. But this is a crisis, no doubt about it. We need to manage it. It's not going to manage itself and fix itself.
Anyone else want to weigh in here before we go?
I want to thank the folks in the audience, and I really do appreciate that there's been this vibrant communication. I really do promise that we're going to all look at that and take it very seriously. And it's been great to read as much as I can of it simultaneously to listening. I want to thank all of the panelists who came, and you guys, took time out of your busy schedules, and I really appreciate that. Kaylee, thanks for doing a great job as always, and we will talk again soon. I hope.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
You bet.
Thanks, Brian.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for setting this up.
Thanks for being so candid, everyone. So, have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Did you shut off the public thing, Brian?